I would rather lose my career than my humanity. And I just thought, good on you.
Huge few weeks for whistleblowing in the corporate sphere, Rhiannon.
Big time.
We've seen Roa Armour from Drax. We've seen the Meta book coming out from Sarah
Wynne-Williams. Yep.
And we've also seen Paulina from AMV BBDO talking about trying to raise red flags on greenwashing from the inside and then waiving her NDA.
What a woman. I mean, did you see that LinkedIn? She said, I would rather lose my career than my humanity. And I just thought, good on you.
It's powerful though. I mean, the stakes are super high for whistleblowers with the legal system being what it is. I mean, especially in the US. We've also seen Greenpeace being forced to pay reparations to an energy company. So protest, basically speaking up, is now super, super high stakes.
I respect these people so much. And you just think for every one of them that's actually got the bravery, integrity, but also resource to pull this to the front, imagine how many other people there are that aren't doing anything, that have taken the NDA, that have taken the severance package. And it's scary, isn't it?
I respect and understand that too, though. Not everyone has the luxury of protest. They don't have the savings or the safety net to be able to put themselves on a limb. It is very scary. I mean, also as business owners, we pride ourselves on our truth proposition.
Correct.
And we really believe that builds trust in the partnerships we have with clients. But it is still not easy to speak sometimes to leadership when you really disagree, when you really feel they're making a fundamental misstep or doing something that's unethical. It is really hard because you are in a position where you are risking that relationship. However, I always believe it's the right thing to do if you can do it.
Well, I mean, we've built our whole business around it, and it's easier for us. We get to have that as part of the psychological contract of working with us or for us, is that you will hear the truth, and it's always given and delivered in a way with a good intent, but you will hear the truth. I think, gosh, how much harder for these people in these organizations that these are the businesses that are keeping a roof over their heads, you know, and these are big, powerful businesses. It must be so scary to do it. And I think it raises some really interesting, wider topics around trust, truth, communications. You know, how far will it go?
I think it's also about, what do you expect from your employer in terms of ethics, in terms of respecting the voice of your colleagues. As an employer-employee relationship, you hope that you have a mutual trust between leaders and employees, that at least there is a forum to be heard. Of course, leaders have accountability ultimately for those decisions, and they have to stand by the actions they take. But not having an outlet or a forum to hear and respect colleague views, I think, is dangerous.
I think you're spot on, because all three of the whistleblowers you just referenced, all of them raised or tried to raise red flags from inside the organization. I think it's really easy to sort of think, oh, this person's got on their pedestal, you know, they're having their moment in the press. No, those people will have worked tirelessly to try and change the system that they were in before they realized that the system wasn't listening and the system didn't care.
Well, I think it's also potentially becoming an increasing risk to business, this idea of employee dissent. I think dissent is a really powerful force if it's channeled in the right way. A bit of that friction, a bit of that healthy debate, being challenged by your colleagues and by your employees, I think is a fantastic thing for leaders.
Agreed.
But only if there's a forum for it, it's channeled, it's constructive, people do feel like they will get listened to. Otherwise, it just becomes really toxic.
Can you imagine if organizations put as much time, effort, and energy into employee dissent as they did into employee advocacy? Imagine employee advocacy programs that we have now that people know are absolutely key to selling brand, product, organizational culture. Like, we rely on people to do that for us. Imagine if we also thought about how we could channel those who do have a dissenting voice, you know, who perhaps want to use their voice for activism rather than advocacy. I think it could be really powerful, but you're right, it relies on a system that is listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think the stakes are really high for everyone at the moment. For business leaders, they're operating in a society where rules are changing and shifting, and they're trying to navigate that and steer those waters. at the same time, I think things have opened up for businesses to also just do whatever they want. So there's also that shift in regulation and governance.
I think you've got a third shift there, which is employees and candidates care more about values-based decisions than ever before. So there's a paradigm there with what you've just described.
If we operate in both a society and a workplace where fear is the governing factor and everyone is scared to speak up, imagine the sort of impact of that long term. Imagine the implications for both society and the workplace as you start to get to a place where people are afraid to challenge, afraid to dissent within a workplace. The amount of products that will get built that can do harm, the amount of decisions that get taken that have generational impacts, because business is operating on this huge plane now, you know, especially when you think about the tech industry. You need those dissenting voices to make sure that you have some checks and balances. And that should come from within. It should come from the people that you've hired who are damn smart, who you've hired for a reason. You don't want them to just execute blindly. Ideally, you want them to challenge.
That's when we hear people say, you know, organizations say, we want disruptors, we want high agency people, we want people that challenge the norm. You only want them to challenge to a point, and then you want them to be quiet and do what they're told. And that's where there's a real limit, I think, to how much activism, dissenters, etc., all those sorts of people, there's a real limit to how much they can succeed in those environments.
Do you think we're going to start seeing a different contractual employer-employee relationship where contracts stipulate your compliance with decision making and put clear penalties in place for whistleblowing of any kind? I mean, would an employee sign up to that in the first place? And do you think an employer could get away with it?
Feels dystopian, doesn't it?
It does, but we are living in a quite alarmingly dystopian age, no?
And that would also rely a little bit on the employer brand, I think, because if you had sold me a really convincing employer brand, I might sign that contract because I might think, oh, there's no way they're going to be like that. And that's when you would really get to an expectations reality gap. If you were really honest about your employer brand and you were very clear about who you are, the sorts of work that we do here, the type of culture that we have, the good, the bad, and the ugly, maybe that, you know, maybe someone, you know, wouldn't sign it or would sign it, but with full awareness of what was going on.
There's a campaign in the news at the moment, which everyone's buzzing about.
Tell me.
It's a recruitment marketing campaign, actually for, I think it's a defense contractor in the US.
Okay, interesting.
And they are basically marketing themselves saying, don't come and work here. They've done a big sort of guerrilla campaign on lots of trains, etc. It almost looks like they've been sort of hacked and tagged graffiti-wise.
Like graffiti style,
Exactly. And then when you go deeper, the campaign speaks about, look, this is hard problems, hard work in hard mode, constantly.
TLDR, it's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And there's a real, you can see they're really targeting a specific audience and also tapping into maybe a certain mindset that people who work from home aren't working seriously. You know, that age-old trope we've heard.
If you're in your pajamas, you're not working hard.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
If you want to come into an office, do real work on real things. It has a little element of the manosphere to it, I have to say. That sort of, you know, real men do real work for the military. And it's really unapologetic in that very specific tone. So it's very honest. It also talks about the people that work there being, you know, obsessed with America. So real patriots.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So we are going for a certain type of colleague. Obviously, I like the honesty of it. I also quite like using some out-of-home advertising for employer branding. We don't see that much of that anymore.
Guerrilla style marketing is back.
Quite into that. You know what I do like about it though, and I quite like these opportunities when we get them in the consultancy as well, is when a brand just knows exactly who they are, and when that knowledge does not equate to vanilla employer blanding. And I think it gives a much more interesting, provocative, creative platform from which to do work. I also think it allows a much better balance of compel versus repel, i.e. let's make sure people self-select out of this process. And I do like that. I think that's important, powerful stuff. And if more businesses did it, we would have lower attrition in the first couple of years of colleagues starting.
true, it is the antithesis of building an inclusive culture, because it basically says we want people who feel this way, think this way, act this way.
Yeah.
I do wonder of the impact of that long term,
Yeah.
especially in an industry like military and defense,
Scary.
where you are basically hiring people who have a certain mindset and not allowing people to be welcome in that space who might have different views. But it's exactly what we're talking about with dissent, right? They're not necessarily looking for dissenting voices. They are looking for people that are baked into the mission, who are, you know, obsessed with patriotism in the US. They have drunk that Kool-Aid and they're ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work.
Emily, could you roll your sleeves up further and also get to work, please?
Get to work, exactly. I'm not just sat around my pajamas here.
No, quite.
But no, it plays on tropes like the idea of, you know, they told me there'd be travel for work. This is their idea of business travel, and it's a guy sort of on a speedboat, you know, pulling in nets and, you know,
oh wow, okay,
yeah, real again, that sort of rugged, outdoorsy.
Yeah.
But it does speak to a very masculine culture.
I wonder what problem they were solving. You know, I wonder what, like, I hear what you're saying, but I'm also wondering internally, what was that brief that led to that work? Was it that we have an issue with resilience, or that we are finding people aren't working hard enough? Or have they identified that there's a particular group of high performers that they want more of?
I think it might have been we've hired people who aren't as bought into the mission as we are and are challenging some of the implications of what we do here.
Interesting.
/ are looking for things like flexibility. Gosh, what snowflakes. Speaking of the manosphere, I'm going to pivot wildly now.
Okay, let's hear it.
Go with me on this one.
Okay.
So everyone in my newsfeed is talking about adolescence and this idea that we're leaving boys behind, that, you know, from a very young age, they're exposed to content like the sort of Andrew Tate content, gaming, pornography, and it's creating a sense of inability to connect with members of the opposite sex, for example, form relationships, communicate openly, and building that sort of misogyny really early on. But it's not necessarily pointing the fingers at either parents or children. It's basically saying this is a tech implication. But I did start to wonder, because I do see that in society, and I think it's playing out in schools now with boys being left behind. I do wonder what that impact that has on the workplace when the children of this generation who are grappling with this enter the workforce in, you know, 10 years' time, for example. How is that going to impact their ability to connect with colleagues, their ability to feel valued, to feel like they understand their role? Because a lot of it talks about those typical gender roles and the fact that because there's been so much emphasis on empowering women, even in schools, you know, talking about Women's History Month and making sure that female role models are discussed in class, that idea that, you know, men somehow feel out of the conversation or left behind, I do think carries through to the workplace.
I agree. And I think it's not just that generation. I saw a study the other day that found that the majority of people surveyed that were in the Gen Z category felt that men were being left behind because too much was being done on feminism.
Well, it's also when you see, I would say I felt and perceived more of a lack of male allyship in this year's International Women's Day. Certainly in my feed and my conversations, I was thinking, where are all the men? Because usually there are a lot of men and companies speaking up, but it did feel like that conversation was very much within my female circle this year. So I just wonder
Could be your algorithm, your echo chamber, of course.
Yeah, maybe. But I wonder if there's also something in this idea that in workplaces too, this, you know, women's empowerment has gone too far. Narrative starts to pervade and you start to see that backlash between the sexes in the workplace playing out. I feel like we're starting to see that already.
I would agree, yeah. Especially people of a certain age at the moment. I think I could see that.
I'm being discriminated against.
Yeah, I can't.
As a white man.
I'm a mid-50s white man and I can't get another job because they're all going to people of colour or that are female.
So how much worse will that be if from the age of 13 to 18, your views are also being shaped in that direction by what you're seeing online.
Massively.
That women are getting all the opportunities, we're being left behind.
Yeah.
I think it's something that the workforce of the future is really going to have to grapple with if we don't start tackling that in those formative years.
Yeah, what a fascinating perspective. And I love the idea of thinking about the workforces of the future, much more so than just like the 18-year-olds, but actually what are our children, what's happening to our children, and what will the workplace do or not do for them when they get there. Well,
Adolescence, the TV series, speaks to that idea of, if you can't speak to a girl at a disco or a girl in your class, which we all took for granted, right? That's sort of those awkward teenage interactions. How on earth are you going to have a difficult conversation with a colleague?
Or have a female boss.
Right, exactly. You've lost those communication grounding years that form your relationships and form your ability to build trust.
Fascinating.